Okay. Hey, welcome to Synth Seeker. Today we're going to talk about soundstage. Now, full disclosure, all bets are off. I'm going to talk about what I do, and I like the sound of what I do. I'm going to tell you how I get the sound that I get, but I'm not a professional. I'm totally an amateur. I teach during the day. I work on music at night. We're just going to disassemble the piece of music that you heard at the beginning of the video, and sort of take apart how I am setting up those instruments across the soundstage, panning left and right, whether we're applying chorus or not, and reverbs to move things forward and backwards on the space. There's more than one way to do this. There are entire schools of thoughts and classes you could take and books you can read on it. This is just going to show you how I do it, and if that's useful for you, great. If you have any questions, leave them down below, or comments are always welcome. And let's get started. So what you just heard was trying to do a lot with a little. That's just 3 monosynths and a little drum kit playing along. So we've got this little Moog Minitaur here. Okay, if you've watched any of the previous videos, which I've linked in the corner, this is a little Moog Minitaur playing a square wave sort of pluck sound. It's running through an 1/8 note delay, a dotted 1/8 note delay, and then into a little chorus, and then into a reverb. And what's happening is the delay is not a ping pong delay, although you could experiment with that, putting the echoes left and right. I've just got it as a straight mono delay. What you're hearing is a single oscillator on the Minitaur if there are 2 oscillators, and on your synths, if you layer 2 oscillators together, you're going to get a chorusing effect, which can, it introduces an interesting phasing sound, but depending on your synth, if your oscillators sort of can be panned or automatically pan, that can give some width to your sound. Since the Minitaur is a mono synth and it's monophonic as well as a single oscillator, what I do is I add a little chorus to it. All right, so here's without. Actually, let's disassemble the whole thing. Let's turn the reverb and the chorus off, and we'll turn the delay off. Here's the basic sound. Right? It's a nice harmonically rich little square wave. I've got an arpeggiator. And when we add our delay, right, and then we add a little chorus, it starts spreading it out in the field. And then reverb gives it some distance. Let's hear it without the chorus and the delay. And we'll alternate the reverb here. No reverb. Reverb. So this is a relatively large reverb with about a 1.2 second delay time, and it's wet dry. It's about 37 or 40, somewhere, 40%. It's entirely up to you what your settings are, right? If you have a short decay time, it sounds like a smaller room. This is not an educational video on how to use reverb. This is just, given a reverb, there's generally a decay time. I'm not going to get into pre-delay and stuff, but there's a decay time and a wet dry. Those two settings, those two parameters are going to give you a lot of control over the sound at a very coarse level. And that's all you really need here. As we increase the decay time for the reverb, it feels like a larger space. And as we move things from dry to more wet, it sounds like that instrument is moving away from us. Right? That sounds like it's being played down the hallway. And so we just judiciously add a little reverb. So we feel on our soundstage, we can position that instrument. Really? And that's all there is to it. Essentially, we're going to do this to every instrument. We're going to give it a little chorus, perhaps, and we're going to apply a little reverb, and then based on wet, dry, and decay time, decide how big the space is and where is the instrument playing in the distance, and then you can pan left and right. All right. So that's our little Minitaur arpeggiation. Now, let's move on. Our bass line is this Subsequent 37, also a monosynth. So what's going on here? Let's turn off our effects. That's the basic dry sound. Sub 37s are good at these sort of gritty synth leads and basses. So that's what I've got going on there, with random filter frequency being like sample and hold randomization being applied to the filter in time with the beats. Right. So this is, again, a monosynth. It's monophonic and mono, not stereo, single output. So we widen it a little bit with a little bit of chorus. You know, and you could set your settings for wet dry, how wide that is. There's a width control on a lot of choruses, on stereo choruses. The amount of chorus, the rate at which it's basically what a chorus does is it takes the signal, combines it with a slightly delayed copy of that signal, and you can determine how much, what their offset is, and then that time value can shift, be modulated in time, and you can decide the rate at which that happens. Again, I'm not going to get into explaining what chorus does. Just know that when you apply a chorus to something, there's generally a wet, dry, and an amount knob. Play with amount till you get a sort of chorusing effect that you like the sound of, and then wet, dry will allow you to subtly change whether it's very, very wide. Okay, because the effect of a stereo chorus is to split those two signals. The delayed one goes in one channel and the original one goes in the other. So there's our dry. It sounds pretty much dead center. And as we bring in the chorus, it gets wider. And then again, we apply some reverb. As I increase my wet dry, it moves out into the distance. Now this has about a 2 1/3 second delay time, so it sounds like a much bigger space than the chorus we were using, than the reverb we were using on the Minitaur. Now for bass, I don't like to put a lot of reverb on there. This particular bass, because the frequency of the filter is being randomly shifted, you get these little high peaks, these little high frequency little bits. I like it that those high frequency bits trigger the reverb to basically you hear that reverberation, that ambience on the high bits of the bass line. You don't necessarily want the reverb to be emphasizing the low frequencies of your bass, it just gets muddy. So it's still present, but it's a little set back on the stage a little bit. Okay. And then lastly, we've got this lead sound. Now the lead sound is also a mono synth. Here we go. That is the sound. It's coming off of a Nord A1. And it's just straight mono. No effects are being applied to it. What I do is, in this case, I'll apply a little bit of unison, which again takes a copy of that, doubles the oscillators, and then detunes them slightly. And you get this sort of stereo spread. Here's without. Here's with. Right? It's subtle, but you end up, you can always crank that unison way up and get an absurd amount of separation. You can do something like this. That's a lot of unison. More than I want. Just a bit. And then I'm using, again, a Valhalla supermassive reverb / delay combination to give it a wash, sort of a Berlin School wash, which is I talked about in a previous video. All right. And that works well when layered on top of that bass and our Minitaur, right? So this is what we're listening to. And then I've got just a simple drum bit. And that's basically a kick snare and 2 shakers. One shaker is panned a little left, the other shaker is panned a little right. The kick and the snare are dead center. And that just gives us a backbeat for the piece. That's basically it. So to sum up, essentially what we do is we could take any signal, right? If you have stereo synths, go ahead and go nuts, play with them, put them wherever you want in the stereo field. But when I think in terms of individual instruments, so I've got 3 instruments here. I've got Minitaur sort of arpeggiated chord part. I've got a bass line on the subsequent playing our bass parts, and I've got a lead playing and then drums. And if you think of them as individual players up on a stage, right, I've got my subsequent is pretty much right in the middle. It's set back a bit on the stage. The Minitaur is sort of smeared across the stage, right? They're from left-right perspective. We've got a pretty broad chorus on there. And so there, if you think of it as the bass being dead center in time with the drums, more or less dead center, although the drums have a little bit of stereo separation in the shakers, right? But your rhythm parts, you generally want right in the middle. And then we've got our chord part, that arpeggiation running, sort of mid-spread through there. And then we've got the lead part, which is also pretty much dead center with just a little bit of variation over time because of the unison sort of moves it, wiggles it back and forth a little bit. But then the delay reverb on that is just huge, and the wash fills the room. And when you basically fills in all of the gaps between things. Anyway, so that's sort of how I approach soundstage. With just a few instruments. When it gets down to where I've got 7, 8, 9 instruments playing, what I will often do is collapse them to mono, which if you're working in Ableton, there's a utility device which can be used to collapse something down to mono completely, or you can just reduce its width a bit. You can also accentuate its width in the stereo field, but that gets a little if you do that too much with too many instruments, you get these strange sort of phasing artifacts and frequencies start dropping out of your music. But a lot of times I will position something manually left and right in the field using a utility device and collapse it to mono. Or I will use the bass mono option where the low frequencies at some cutoff point are sort of collapsed to mono, but your high frequencies are allowed to remain with some sort of stereo width there. And then do your positioning. And you can think of it like the clock, from 9 to 3 on the clock. You have some instruments right at noon, midnight. We've got some instruments at 11-1, 10-2, 9-3. And honestly, I don't do a lot of things at 9-3. It's almost too wide. Anyway, so that's it. I hope this was useful for you. If it is, great. Leave a comment. If you have other ideas or things I haven't tried that you think work great, share those in the comments for the other people who visit, and we'll turn this into some useful little resource. All right. Thanks very much. Have a great time. Again, I'd love to hear what you make. Send a comment that says, hey, I've got my stuff. Here's my channel. I'll come take a listen. And as always, you have been watching Synth Seeker. Have a great day.